So what color are Amish buggies? I'm going to run through the 6 Amish buggy colors with you today, starting from the most common all the way down to the rarest or least common. One of the neat things about the Amish is that there are many different types of Amish, and there are many different ways of being Amish. One of the areas where you see differences among the Amish is in their types of buggies, and specifically the color of the buggies. So let's jump into it. The most common Amish buggy color is black, and it's used by Amish from many different groups. You'll see this throughout the Midwest. You'll see this in Holmes County, Ohio, and northern Indiana, Iowa. You'll see this in some Pennsylvania churches, in Dover, Delaware. Now, having the same color doesn't mean the buggies are all identical, and you'll see different styles in different communities. One example would be like there's a group in central Pennsylvania called the Reno Amish, which have a very boxy style black buggies. In Holmes County, Ohio, the buggies have sort of a diagonal angle to them. The ones in northern Indiana will be different. They have kind of like a squarish box on the back. Or if you go to the Dover, Delaware community, those buggies have a very curved shape at the bottom. In some communities, they only use open buggies or open carriages. So they'll be black in color, but they won't have a top to them. So the Amish in those communities have to carry umbrellas with them just in case. So number 2, gray. Now, where do we see the gray buggy? This is the characteristic buggy of the Lancaster County Amish people and those of its sister settlements, the settlements that have originated and come from there. Those would include communities in southern Maryland, in Indiana, in New York, and in different places. So why gray? Stephen Scott, he was a friend of mine. He's passed away. He was the author of a book called Plain Buggies. Stephen wrote that in 1860. A woman named Phoebe Earl Gibbons described the Lancaster buggy as covered with yellow oilcloth. Benjamin Hoover, who's an Old Order Mennonite deacon born in 1874, said that the Amish buggies of his childhood were about half yellow and half gray. Another writer noted in 1911 that the yellow of the oilcloth has disappeared, lead color having taken its place. So the color has apparently evolved over time. So if you see gray, you can know that that's a buggy from Lancaster County or from a Lancaster-related settlement. Number 3, brown. This is a very interesting color. You'll find the brown top buggies mainly in one large community in Pennsylvania. It's a community at New Wilmington, in the western end of the state, and in its related settlements, which you'll find in Pennsylvania and in New York. So why does this community have a brown color top? So Stephen Scott has another suggestion. He writes that this color approaches the color commonly seen on circus tents, and perhaps the Amish obtained the same type of canvas for their tops many years ago. We don't know for sure if that's the correct origin story, but I kind of like the idea of circus tent canvas being used to cover plain Amish buggies. Number 4, white. This color is used by one group in particular. They're called the Nebraska Amish. And despite the name, you won't find any in the state of Nebraska. Where do you find them? Well, the main group is located in central Pennsylvania in a community in Mifflin County called Big Valley, colloquially. And this is one of the plainer Amish groups. And you can notice this by the style of these buggies. They're quite open. They have like an open front. They have kind of like a brown sort of bottom box. They don't have electric lights on them like other buggies commonly will. They'll have a couple of blue lanterns with sort of red hued lights hanging on one on either side. They do use the SMV safety triangle, the orange triangle on the back. So the front there's kind of like the windshield of a car. These guys don't have that. So you can imagine like in the winter, that makes for a much chillier ride. You typically will have these heavy blankets that you have in the buggy to protect yourself in those conditions. Why are they called Nebraska Amish? That name comes from the home state of an early leader of this traditional group. Number 5, yellow. This is, for me, basically the most unexpected or unlikely of Amish buggy colors. We think of the Amish, we think of a very kind of plain, traditional people. Where does yellow come from? These buggies are very hard to miss when you see them, by the way, but they're very rare, and there's only a handful of church congregations, maybe half a dozen out of the total of over 2,000 Amish churches. This is a group called the Byler Amish. This is also in Mifflin County, Pennsylvania, in the Big Valley settlement, where I just told you that the Nebraska Amish are commonly found. So if you go to this community in Big Valley, you'll see 3 different colors in one community. This yellow, the white of the Nebraska Amish, and then the black of the Reno Amish, which I also mentioned a little bit earlier. Where did this yellow buggy color come from? Stephen Scott again shared a couple theories on this. One Amish person apparently suggested that the white paint on early carriages actually turned yellow over time, which led to people simply painting the tops that shade right to begin with, I guess, so everything would match. So a second theory is that these early tops of this group were made from an unbleached oilcloth, which is actually the same kind that you would use at that time for raincoats. So those are 2 interesting theories. Do we know definitively where this comes from? No, we don't. But I can definitively say these are very attention-getting buggies. In fact, some people have wondered, well, why don't all Amish adopt this buggy color? Because, with the many tragic accidents that happen on the road where Amish buggies get hit, wouldn't a bright lemon yellow buggy get people's attention more? Good question. These outward signs of Amishness tend to become quite tied into Amish identity. And so one community has, a sense of identity, which in part is tied to the style of dress, the type of technology that's used, the type of buggy, the color of the buggy even. So, these things are not just done strictly from sort of logic or, what would get the most attention on the roads, but they're also deeply rooted in the tradition, the culture, and the sort of specific identity of the individual groups. So number 6. Now I should preface this by saying that when I originally came up with this list, and I actually published this on the Amish America site as a post, it was originally titled The 5 Amish Buggy Colors, because I missed one. I left one off, and a reader, actually an Amish reader, alerted me to this, that there is one more color that's even more rare than the yellow of the Byler Amish. And that's what I would call the Enon Valley faded yellow color. There's a very tiny Amish community in western Pennsylvania, not too far from the New Wilmington community with the brown buggies. That was number 3 on this list that I mentioned. It's actually kind of related to that community. And I originally thought this Enon Valley group's buggies were the same color as the New Wilmington brown. I think I'd seen a picture of them once. I'd never visited that community. And so I mistakenly thought it was the same color, but it is different. I later went to visit this Enon Valley community to see for myself and took some photos and confirmed that, yes, they are a different tone. This is a tiny community. It's only about 15 homes there in this church. It's got a very interesting history, but that's a story for another time. It's kind of yellow like the Byler Amish, but not quite as bright. And it's definitely not the brown of the New Wilmington, which I mistakenly thought it was. I think I'd seen a photo online, which might have been, that was described as an Enon Valley buggy, but it might have had some kind of a Photoshop effect on it that made it look more brown, which is why I made that mistake. The buggy is a symbolic of the Amish. It's one of the first things we think of when we think of the Amish. It sort of represents them in some way. The different buggy colors also sort of represent the differences, diversity, or whatever you want to call it, the differences across Amish communities. And the Amish are not just one sort of one-size-fits-all community, but they share a lot of the same beliefs. But individual Amish groups and settlements, of which there are very many, you'll see different ways of living, different traditions, different aspects of culture that vary across all the many communities. And that's one thing that I find makes the Amish so interesting to learn about. I hope you did too. So I have another video on, let's say, another iconic form of Amish transportation, and that's the scooter. In this video, I look at where do Amish use scooters? Where do they use bikes? Why do they use one, not the other? What are scooters like? What are some unusual bicycles that Amish use? So you can check that out here. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to get more videos like this one, and I'll talk to you next time.